Nearly 7 hours out from the United States imposing massive tariffs on Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says there's a reprieve and those tariffs will be paused for at least 30 days. Tariffs on Mexico were also put on pause this morning after outcry from all three countries and concern over the consequences for the North American trade agreement. That concern prompted 43 Democratic lawmakers to sign a letter in opposition to those tariffs, saying these broad tariffs will devastate Americans already struggling with high prices, will kill jobs and hurt diplomatic relationships with our closest partners. We urge the administration to rescind the relevant executive orders immediately. So, is this pause a victory for those lawmakers, or will this fight just pick up again in 30 days? Congressman Greg Stanton led this effort and sent the final letter to President Donald Trump, and he joins me now. Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome to Power and Politics.
It's good to be on.
This is not over, but they've pressed the pause button on these tariffs. What's your reaction to these latest developments?
Well, I'm glad that there was a pause, but it's really unfortunate that the United States is threatening our next door neighbors, our most important trading partners, Mexico and Canada, at a time when our greatest economic adversary is China. We should be working more closely with our next door neighbors, forming a North American economic unit, which is the best way to win this economic battle with China. It was unclear to me what the real reason was. Obviously, it seems like the concessions that Mexico made were concessions that were already being made, and concessions made by Canada could have been done through the negotiating table. That's what the USMCA was all about. It was such a big victory for North America. And that's the model about how we should be working together, not just on economic issues, but on security issues as well.
When the executive order was released and signed on Saturday, it cited a public health emergency caused by fentanyl to use the extraordinary emergency powers that the president is using to now threaten these tariffs, not impose these tariffs. There was a pushback here in Canada that isn't really about fentanyl. It isn't really about the border. It's about the larger economic agenda of this president. Do you buy that this is about fentanyl and that this is about the border? What is your view?
Well, fentanyl is a major issue inside the United States, and the United States, Mexico, and Canada should be working together to challenge the cartels and the delivery of this dangerous and deadly drug that hurts too many of our fellow Americans and Canadians. We should all be working together on a regional security cooperative agreement, particularly because the World Cup was just around the corner. So this is a real opportunity for the three countries to be working together. The way to deal with that is not through the threat of tariffs against our economic partners, which I know you're looking through the lens of Canada, but as an American, the fact that we're focused in on lowering prices and we're doing something that is just the opposite of that, it's going to significantly increase the cost of living for Americans. It's just heading in the wrong direction. There is a better way of going about it. That's through using the soft power of the United States, the negotiating power, our relationships, working with our allies. That's a better way to deal with these challenging issues than the threat of unnecessary tariffs.
Yes, even at the lower 10% rate on energy, you're still looking at 25 to 30 cents a gallon on gasoline in certain parts of your country, and then heating prices going up in the winter. The president has posted on Truth Social saying, I am very pleased with this initial outcome, and the tariffs announced on Saturday will be paused for a 30-day period to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada can be structured. Fairness for all. So here he is again, though, going back to an economic deal. I do think the fentanyl, which I concede is a significant problem on both sides of the Canada-U.S. border. We have a lot of deaths and a public health emergency that goes back years in the province of British Columbia. But is this just a pretext for economic recalibration, or do you really think it is fentanyl? Because the president himself is saying it's about a fair economic deal.
Well, the president said during the campaign he was looking at tariffs on Mexico and Canada. He said it earlier in his presidency, and then he executed on it. Look, I don't want to get in the president's mind. I would never fathom to guess what's going through our president's mind on an issue like this. All I know is completely self-defeating at a time when in a year's time, we're going to be renegotiating USMCA. That is the time to talk about the details of the trade arrangement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. But using the threat of tariffs, which would greatly increase prices on Americans, obviously increase prices on Canadians as well as Mexican citizens as well. That is self-defeating and moving us backwards when we know that we are such good friends with Canada, and we have a great relationship with the new president of Mexico, that the best way to deal with these issues, including security issues, is by working together. We know we have willing partners on both to the north and to the south of us. Working together at a negotiating table is the best way to deal with this. Again, I mentioned the World Cup again because the World Cup is such a great opportunity to really solidify and increase the security working relationships between our three countries.
Canada had initially responded to the president's demands with a $1.3 billion border plan, putting more resources at the border, helicopters, drones, better tracking of fentanyl precursors, some proposed legislative amendments for money laundering. The new developments today, sir, is Canada is making a commitment to appoint a fentanyl czar, will list cartels as terrorists, and ensure 24/7 eyes on the border, launch a Canada-U.S. joint strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. And the Prime Minister says he's also signed a new intelligence directive on organized crime and fentanyl, and we will be backing it with $200 million. How does that sound to you? I know these are very just high-level details, but what do you make of that response from the Canadian government?
That's great. That's a very positive thing, and I believe that all of that would have occurred, and even more can occur when we get across a negotiating table and do this the way that partners do it with each other, which is through discussion and negotiation. The relationship between the United States and Canada is arguably one of our top bilateral relationships on this entire planet. It's the reason why we've had such success being neighbors, and we serve each other in war, and we serve each other during times of need, like Canada has helped us during natural disasters or the forest fires in Los Angeles, et cetera, how they have helped us so tremendously. And we helped Canada when they were going through difficult times. We are partners, we are friends, and we are better when we are working closely together. And all of the things that were mentioned are good things, steps in a positive direction. And oh, by the way, the United States needs to do more to make sure that, for example, weapons are not crossing the border into Mexico, and money laundering, money isn't flowing illegally across the border as well. So in order for this to work, it's not one country casting blame upon another. It's all three of us as a North American unit working more closely together, economically and from a security perspective.
Look, when you look at the economic consequence of tariffs in both directions, the job losses, the inflationary effect, the lost productivity, the lost economic growth, and then you look at the shared history of the two countries, fighting together on the battlefields of Europe and Afghanistan, it does seem almost absurd that it would get to this point to deal with a common shared problem. But it's inflamed some of these sorts of tensions. We've seen at hockey games, at basketball games, Canadians booing the U.S. national anthem, with the Minnesota Wild being the first victim of it here in Ottawa. What's your sense of what this may have done, even with the 30-day pause, kind of to the relationship between the two countries? Are you worried about some lasting damage or diminished trust, at least in the medium term?
Yes. I mean, and just look, the United States needs to be the global leader, and we need to embrace that role. I'm concerned about a retreat from our global responsibilities under President Trump. I'm a big believer that the United States has led the post-World War II world order, and that has been great for this planet, certainly great for the United States and for our economy. We shouldn't retreat from that responsibility. We should be embracing that responsibility. And using the threats of tariff against our next door neighbors and friends, the ones that we need most if we're going to win the ultimate long-term economic battle with China, I believe is self-defeating when we could accomplish the exact same things through conversation and negotiation at a table, like we will be doing in just a short period of time with the renegotiation of USMCA.
I wonder how you think this affects that. You know what I mean? If this really is about an economic deal, as the president says, that is going to raise, I think, the anxiety levels about the review process of the Continental Trade Agreement starting next year. I wonder what concerns you have on that, because here we are, we're not just 2 weeks into the presidency, and it's already been a couple of months of disruption going back to the tariff threat on social media in November. I mean, what are your thoughts on what we can expect when we actually do get to that formal trade revisiting on the USMCA?
But we're going to have tough negotiations, as we should. We had tough negotiations When we renegotiated NAFTA, I was a leader in the United States Congress in making the case that we needed a modernized trade agreement, but we needed a trade agreement because we are stronger when we have that growing trade relationship between the United States and Canada and growing trade relationship between the United States and Mexico. It has to be done fairly. It has to be done fairly from a labor perspective to make sure the workers across North America are being treated fairly. But we are stronger when we have an agreement. We're going to have some tough negotiations, but it has to be done in a spirit of trust and understanding the shared history between our nations. And that's why I think this unnecessary threat of a trade war of these tariffs was really ultimately self-defeating for what we're trying to accomplish.
So we have a 30-day window here, sir, to try to resolve this for good, ideally. I mean, what do you think will happen in the next 30 days? What do you hope to see happen in the next 30 days? Because I'm sure businesses and politicians on both sides of the border don't want to go through this on a monthly basis. Well, what would you like to see happen over the next few weeks here?
Well, look, I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone, but I do suggest that the reaction of the United States stock market to the threats of these tariffs, which went terribly. Obviously, the stock market went very, very badly today because a trade war with our two largest trading partners is obviously very bad for the American economy and very bad for American workers. And I think the president got, unfortunately, became well aware of that in advance of any short-term agreement with Canada or Mexico. I think he's going to want to avoid that. So I'm actually optimistic that when this 30-day period is done, that we're not going to continue to see this sort of behavior of unnecessary threats of tariffs against our top two trading partners. It is just so disruptive to the United States economy, so disruptive to the American workforce, that I am hopeful we're not going to continue in that direction.
Just as a final question, Congressman, because I know I have to let you go. The common view is that the president is very transactional and likes to win and get a win out of any kind of a confrontation or a negotiation. Based on seeing the $1.3 billion border plan with another $200 million and some movement on that, does that feel like he can sell that to the American people as a win? How do you think that's going to be interpreted?
Look, everyone's going to view it through their own political lens, and the president has a very strong base that believe that his book that was, ghostwritten by another author called The Art of the Deal is the way we should run international relations. The problem is, of course, that the art of the deal involves kind of win-loss type negotiations. For every dollar I gain, that's a loss for the person across the negotiating table. When it comes to international relationships, these are long-term partnerships. We need the friendship and the support of Canada and Mexico to achieve our long-term goals. And so if we get involved in a negotiation and use the threat of tariffs and maybe gain some short-term benefit, what is the loss long-term? And I wonder if the president, who's negotiated a lot of construction deals or development deals, that type of negotiation may not be the right negotiating style in international relations, particularly with our friends.
Congressman Greg Stanton, we do appreciate your time. If things do go sideways in 30 days, we may call you again, sir. I want to thank you very much for being here today. Thank you, sir.
Bye.